The racial abuse that 3 England players who missed a penalty the other day is not only disgusting, it's not just racism in football, it's racism in society, it's racism in the UK, it's racism in England, and we need to confront that if we're actually going to stop it. What you saw with these players being abused so horrifically with the defacing of murals and abusive messages on social media, that's just the product of racism, that's the end point of it. The structures that enable and sustain that racism are very deep rooted in our society, and we have to challenge them with everything we've got if we're actually going to create a more equal world for everybody. I know that this is not about me, it's about all those people who get discriminated against on a day-to-day basis. Racism permeates every aspect of people's lives, but I think that we as white people only really recognise it when it's on the interpersonal level of racism, like people being abused for who they are, the colour of their skin. But what white people will never experience is the psychological trauma of growing up and living in a society where they are othered all of the time and where they feel like they are constantly having to self-censor in order to operate in society. There's all these microaggressions and blockers throughout their life that we just don't experience as white people. One of the most impactful things that I've ever seen, which really gave me some insight into how structural racism can cause psychological trauma for young black men, is watching Skepta's monologue, whatever you want to call it, Underdog Psychosis, which he uploaded to YouTube in the aftermath of the London riots. He just sort of talks through his experience of school, how he wanted to be a doctor but he never felt that he knew how to navigate that school system and how teachers didn't speak to him properly. And despite being a really exceptional and gifted person, as is evidenced by, you know, his brilliant career as a musician, he only left school with 1 A level and ended up feeling a bit lost as a young man. I think one of the misleading aspects of structural racism is that by calling it that, we can quite easily think of it in the abstract and sort of say, you know, it happens in these institutions, but it's not something that I actively benefit from or contribute to. If you live on a farm that's been in your family for 200 years, that's 200 years worth of compounded wealth which you are now benefiting from. And not only that, you actually own a productive piece of land that is creating an income for your family. I'm sure you work incredibly hard for it, but that kind of inherited compounded wealth is not something that I would say the very, very vast majority of black people in this country have. I was so glad when I saw Tyrone Mings calling out Priti Patel and Boris Johnson for their comments, despite furthering a racist immigration policy in the hostile environment, despite all of the racist slurs that Boris Johnson said in his time as a politician and as a journalist. And you know, Boris Johnson said that he would defend the Winston Churchill statue with his last breath. What about all those black young men in the country who have to suffer with facial recognition technology, misidentifying them as crime suspects just because of the way they look, getting their fingerprints taken from them on the way home from school, being stopped and searched at every opportunity just because of the colour of their skin, all contributing to a psychological trauma that is going to stick with them for the rest of their lives, hurt their self-esteem, make them feel like they're worthless. And these are policies that we have to stop. But if we actually want to make a difference, we can't just be offended, we have to say no to it. Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, wrote a letter to prominent British museums and gave them a veiled warning that their funding would be cut off if they didn't present problematic figures of British history in a way that the government felt comfortable with. The very idea of calling British museums' impartiality into question, that is so ahistorical, it's authoritarian, and it furthers and propagates this structural racism. One thing that I really believe in and back is the idea of decolonising the curriculum. I grew up in Liverpool, which is one of the biggest slave ports in Europe. I never learned anything about the UK's role in the slave trade when I was a kid. Now that I'm older and I've done my own research and my own readings, I realised just how integral the slave trade was to the building of this city. It's crazy that I didn't learn about that in school, like really crazy. I don't know if kids learn about that stuff these days, but you know what, if you're a white parent, I just implore you to teach your kid about like Black history, go and teach yourself first, go and read up on it. And I can say, you know, Natives by Akala is a brilliant place to start. Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race by Rennie Edo Lodge. You just have to inform yourself about these things, and we have to tell future generations the truth if they're not getting taught about it in school. I'll say it again, this is not racism in football, it's racism in Britain. It's been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we need to accept that. We need to get over ourselves and admit where we've gone wrong, and we need to make sure that the future is much better and safer for all of these people. These aren't just any three young lads, these are incredibly gifted footballers, but they're also really socially responsible, and it seems like they're really intelligent people. Saka got A stars and A's in his GCSEs. Marcus Rashford has been speaking out for underprivileged kids and forcing the government to make U-turns on things like free school meals. And you've got Jadon Sancho, who had the courage to go and move abroad, live in Germany, and create a life for himself outside of the norm in terms of football. These are three brilliant people, apart from just being brilliant footballers, and they would have undoubtedly succeeded in any walk of life. And you know what? I think that really triggers some white people who are insecure about themselves and have low self-esteem. Whatever slurs and abuse they're projecting onto these three young black men, I bet it's really about themselves, how they feel worthless inside. But remember, football is just the forum for where this racism gets aired. The problems go much deeper and are much more embedded in our society and in our mindsets. So that was a bit of a step change to a lot of my videos. I really just wanted to speak out about this. And you know what, if you've watched this and you don't agree with me, then please feel free to hit unsubscribe, because this is the values of the community I want to build on this channel, and that's it.